Hi everyone, welcome back to Blurred Box. I'm Chloe.
I'm Haven.
I'm Pooja.
I'm Sophie.
And this is our podcast where 4 online students in 4 different places around the world from Stanford University's online high school come together every week to discuss a variety of topics ranging from world events to our lives in an online school and invite guests to take part in our discussions and share their views. And as an extension from last week's episode where we covered gender equality and a lot of the inequality with women, today we're going to be flipping it over to gender equality for men, and specifically the topic of toxic masculinity. So here with us today, and for the first time on this podcast, we have a special guest, Andras Zolyomi.
Yeah, hi. Do you want me to introduce myself? Should I just go through the whole spiel?
Go for it. Just tell us a bit about...
Cool. I'm a junior. I've been at this school for 3 years, so I started in freshman year. In this school, before I joined, I thought I was very STEM-oriented. Now I'm much more philosophy-oriented, lit-oriented. Outside of the school, I'm a musician. I played piano since I was 4. I play guitar, the drums, sing, do a lot. And I'm also a varsity swim captain. So I do that as well in my spare time. That's basically everything. It takes up a lot of time.
Oh, cool.
And you love equal rights.
Yeah.
Nice. And within society today, I think your profile is actually quite similar to, I guess, a lot of the, maybe not similar, but some parts of it kind of fit into like the similar stereotypes that within society today, there are a lot of traditional kinds that men and boys are expected to live up to, right? Or fit into to a certain degree. And I guess before we go any deeper into that, have you ever felt yourself that you've felt that you've kind of had to live up to a certain stereotype, or that you've had to live up to a certain expectation?
Interesting. So the question is if I feel like I'm classified in a stereotype, if I feel like I'm categorized in that sense. I mean, yeah, to an extent, I feel like we all are. In an extent. The label varsity swim captain does wonders in terms of college applications, but then you start talking to people and you get the whole jock relationship thing, which isn't true. But other than that, really, I don't think anything severe, nothing that impacts how I think daily.
Sure. And do you think that maybe you've had that kind of expected from others in terms of perhaps parents or coaches or friends even, that you've had to hold up a certain kind of image to fit that in society?
I don't think it's so much for society. Being a captain of the team, I have to hold up a certain image to make sure people listen. But other than that, it's not really, there's no pressure. It's a very welcoming environment. I think I'm lucky to have that because I'm not sure it's the case everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's a very small team. Well, not very small, but it's a small comparatively team to like California schools. So it's much more tight-knit. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, definitely. And I think, I agree with what you said. With a lot of people, it's not necessarily the same situation. And I guess for that in general, a lot of Americans into today's society still believe that, men should be the main source of income and the providers for the family, that males should also be the stronger sex, or they should get more respect for having sex, and that men should never show their feelings to their friends, things like that. So I guess, do you agree with these statements, first of all?
Oh, do I classify myself in these statements? No, I think I'm going to be the stay-at-home dad, which kind of goes against all of these stereotypes. Do I believe they exist, this idea of toxic masculinity? I think it's true to an extent. I am personally not encumbered by it as much as other people, I think. So I may not be the model for it, but I still think it does exist, yeah.
Yeah. I know just from talking to my own family, I think it's great, Andras, that you don't feel that. But I know that there was a period between my parents where my mom was a lawyer and my dad was a college professor. So she was making more income than him. And this was when they just started a family too, so my older 2 sisters, and they were kind of figuring out how that would work. And it was difficult for my dad to overcome that. Not because he wasn't very proud, of my mom for making that contribution to the family, but because he felt like it was the only thing that he could provide to the family at that time. because he wasn't really sure that he had, like the capacity for like emotionally caring for the family, the same way that my mom would. So that was kind of like a stereotype that has since left his mind. But that's what I think of when I think like as far as family structured, like you mentioned. I think that definitely has existed, and probably still does exist to a large extent. Expecting men to be the breadwinner, or to work all day, and kind of not only does it keep the women in the house, but it also deprives the men to an extent of time with the family, which obviously isn't only something that women enjoy.
No, yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, I guess, Andras, do you think that this stems from, or what do you think it stems from? A lot of it in terms of, I guess, I don't know, insecurity, or whether it's something else. I don't know. What we've talked about before, kind of with, I guess, gender equality in general, is that what we're talking about is that with women's rights and such, the improvement was, and the whole goal of it, right, was to get equality. It was not necessarily, I think it was like the main topic of women aren't trying to overrun or trying to surpass men in any extent, but it's trying to be equal. And then men are kind of intimidated by that. They don't want, or they think of it in a different way or perceive it differently.
Misinterpret it, yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think there's also something to be said for some of the movements that label themselves under feminist movements that I've seen that aren't really feminist movements.
Like fringe.
These movements for wage inequality in favor of women, right? There are a couple like that. Not many at all, but still, they give it a bad rep for sure. I think the whole concept of toxic masculinity, as you would define it, right, comes from just historical trends, because previously what gave somebody worth was their ability to contribute in the best possible way. And with older societies, that was dependent on what contribution means. It's always dependent on what contribution means. But previously it meant if you could hunt, you were one of the most valuable members of society, right? And men could hunt, so they took on that role of being quote unquote more valuable. And then now, as it sort of changes, there's a lot of different conceptions about this, and it's definitely changing completely. I mean, Haven's family is a good example. Her mom being the breadwinner to start. That's really interesting. I don't know what you guys think.
No, yeah. My family, I guess, to not disclose too many personal details, it works in the sense that I guess it also has to do with environment, and also to do with where you're from. It differs nationally, obviously. And like we've mentioned, I'm all the way on the other side of the world, so I'm in the Asia region. The function of my family is more that my dad is more of the breadwinner, but that does not necessarily mean that my mom is any lesser, or that her pay is any less significant, right? But the thing is that it does still play a role, or in terms of psychologically and underlying in a certain way when there's family interactions. I think that you can see that not blatantly, but it's there still as like a subtle kind of factor. And I think that exists for a lot of people, or if not a lot of people. I think that's everyone. You can classify that to everyone. I'm not sure what it's like for you guys, but you can go into that. I mean, like Sophie, Pooja, how's that for you?
Yeah, it's kind of similar. I mean, a little bit similar for me, but I think the main thing is that we talked about this in the last episode, but women tend to be the main caretakers, I guess. So they take care of the family, and so especially if you have like kids, then the mother is usually the person who stays home with the kids and takes care of them. So for me, both of my parents are doctors, so job-wise, the income is pretty equal, but I do think that women, even in medicine, are still paid less or unequally compared to men. So I think it's also interesting just to see, like, I don't know what your opinions are on this, but to see how that changes between older generations and younger generations, like the idea of female or women empowerment. Because as Haven said, with her mom and dad kind of trying to balance that power dynamic, I wonder if that's the same for Andras, considering that he's not as, I don't know, focused on being the main breadwinner when he gets older.
Right. Well, I can actually talk a little bit about my family, not to be disclosed too much personal.
Yeah.
But my family, we hail from Europe, right? So my mom and my dad are both from Romania, Transylvania, and they came here with like $500 in a dream, right? So we come from very relatively poor origins, because they came here with literally nothing. So they built it up. They're both doctors. My dad's an anesthesiologist and my mother is an infectious diseases specialist. My dad is paid more than my mom. He works longer hours. He has a more grueling job because he's running everywhere instead of sitting down with patients, and jumping into different ORs. But the point to be made is that he, even though he does get paid more, arguably he works more, right? So I don't think that the same problem that Pooja was mentioning, between male and female doctors is present in my family as much, or if it's noticeable. Because sure, my dad brings in more money, but it's because he puts in more time, right? And I don't know what the statistics look like on that.
I think it's
an interesting thought.
It's important to
Yeah.
also go back, Andras, like what you were mentioning earlier is that it goes back to like what we define like contributing to mean. And in this case, I think we've gotten kind of looped into thinking about it exclusively in terms of economics and in terms of, like, is the family equal? Like, for a family to be equal, both parents have to have an income and both parents have to be, bringing in one. And I don't think that's, necessarily the case. I think we do have to keep in mind that, a housewife or a house husband or whatever is still totally valid and could still definitely be an equal household.
No, yeah, I like what you said, Haven. So for me, my dad is the breadwinner and my mom is a stay-at-home mom. But the reason why it was like that is because we made a decision as a family to homeschool, and just how it worked, we needed a parent to stay at home. And at that time, my dad had the more income because he is an entrepreneur, so he made his own business, and it was at a stage where it was starting to take off. So my mom decided to be the one that stayed at home and take care of my brother and myself while she homeschooled us. So, but it doesn't diminish her worth in any way. Actually, we have a pretty equal standard because as a homeschool mom, she handled so much work, so much of our education and so much all of that. So it's pretty equal in standard in our family. However, as a quote unquote housewife, people think it was just how it was because society thinks the male should be a breadwinner, but no, we have both equal worth. So yeah. I don't know.
I think
I have a weird situation in my family.
That men, if they do choose to be stay-at-home dads, definitely is viewed by some other men as an emasculating career or life. So it's interesting that I don't really see that from women. Women see a stay-at-home dad and they're like, oh my god, he loves kids, and they're all over it. But the reactions I've seen from other men are I can't believe she got you trapped in the house or stuff like that. I don't know if that's a distinction you guys have noticed, but
yeah.
I think you're right about that. That stigma still seems to float around a bit about men being the main breadwinners and the people who are bringing home the money. And so I think by other males, at least right now, I don't know how that will be in a couple years from now or decades from now, but at least right now, it seems that men are still perceived as the people bringing home the most money or the most income. And I think, like you said, Haven, it shouldn't be economically based. We shouldn't be focusing on the economic side as much because there are other parts to take into account. But it seems like in today's society, we do focus more on the money than anything else.
There's actually one thing that I'm interested to see what your response is, Andras. I have a list of words that stereotypically are supposed to fit into the man box, or whatever you want to call it. I'm interested to see what words you come up with and how many correlate with what I have here.
Oh, interesting. So you're going to, on the spot, come up with some man words.
Yeah,
I feel like
let's see what you come up with. Yeah.
Same sex.
I don't know how much I like this. I feel like this is incriminating me. Historically, one word that jumps to mind is alpha, which is
Okay.
really interesting.
All right, sure.
Not, yeah.
I don't like that.
I don't like it either, right? But it's just something that comes to mind.
Sure, yeah.
The word breadwinner comes to mind. I'm thinking of nomadic societies, hunter-gatherers. The
Right.
hunter is the man and the gatherer is the woman. Modern-day man box. Is it strange to say muscular?
No.
I
No.
don't think.
That's actually one of the exact words I have down, so I think you're doing pretty good so far.
Nice.
Or pretty badly.
Yeah, Tarzan-like kind of appearance is the general consensus. I don't
Is
know.
Tarzan on there?
Oh, okay.
Tarzan, like, right, exactly. The rugged man, the rugged definition
That's-
of beauty. And
No, yeah, definitely. You're hitting them all. I'm a bit concerned now.
Rugged beauty was
well,
on
I don't
there?
have any more, so
No,
I did the
actually,
best
yeah.
I could.
So
I mean-
do you think? Sorry,
No,
you can
keep going.
continue.
No, yeah,
I was
keep
like, do
going.
you think these words like have a negative correlation to what a man thinks he should be? Like any negative
Right, it's not
effects that way?
Bad to be a breadwinner, unless you don't want to do that.
Or muscular.
Right. I don't think they're necessarily
Like, do you
bad.
think just having that idea that this is what a man should be has a negative effect psychologically,
Interesting.
especially to men who are growing up?
Right, like men having
And
to
you're
be
just-
muscular the same way women
Oh,
are
right,
supposed
to
to be
live
skinny.
up to that.
Right. So
Right.
there's a distinction to be made here, though, in that saying the attributes that I consider, off the top of my head to be related to masculinity doesn't necessarily mean I'm idealizing them, right? And I don't think it necessarily means anything.
No, for sure, yeah.
Right. So I don't think that they have a positive correlation. I don't think that everybody sees a muscular man and says, that's exactly what I want to be. They see Tarzan and I want, like, not everybody wants to be Tarzan, right? I might want to be the pot-bellied stay-at-home dad. It's not a bad thing. It's just interesting. But yeah, I don't think there is necessarily a positive correlation for negative effects, or not as strongly as you might think.
Yeah. To me, what jumps out actually is that the first impression that you've come up with was Tarzan, for an example, right? And one of the things that I think in society today, a lot of our influence is from media. I don't think that can really be disputed. And one of the interesting examples I've come up with was Disney movies. If you look at Disney movies, they have a lot of stereotypical influence on not just the women, right? I think that's the main one that most people would come up with, right? If you look at like Ariel or with Cinderella or Belle or all those people, like
Sleeping Beauty, all that
exactly.
stuff.
The way that they're drawn or the way that if you look at the beginning cartoons where they still had to be like painted and
Yeah.
did they have to be painted? I'm pretty sure they were like
Snow White.
drawn
So,
and stuff.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or it was Snow White, right?
Yeah.
They have to look a certain way. And there's a lot of like analysis videos on how these characters are drawn in a certain way to fit that. And I'm not sure whether that's intentional, but whether that's intentional or not, that's just a fact. Looking at it towards the men's side, it's actually the same thing. Because if you look at what is it? Prince Eric, I think that's what it is from Ariel. There's also the prince from, like what Andras said, the hunter, right? That's also from Aurora, or was it Sleeping Beauty? Same thing. And then if you look at the prince from Cinderella, not too sure about him, I forget, but just the stereotypical stuff from how they're drawn to and the way that their characters are kind of built up, right? Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
And then the whole like knight in shining armor stereotype.
Chivalry.
It's just so embedded in these early Disney movies. I feel like it could have an effect to male teens who are growing up, or not just teens in general, just starts from a young age.
The
And I
thing
think
that always bothered me
it makes them
when I was watching those movies was, like, I understood, the whole knight in shining armor thing. That was totally fine. It was like, okay, he gets a chance to, like, be a hero, whatever. And because they also usually, they throw the women a bone. And they're like, okay, she has one moment, though, where she, like, saves him from falling off a cliff or something. And they're like, okay, that kind of balances the scales. Now we can say that they both saved each other. But the difference that always bothered me was that the woman was like not ever expected or obligated to do that. But it was always kind of like the prince's job or his sole role in that movie to save her. So when she saved him, it was
that's
like definitely
like,
balancing the scales, but it was never her
That's
role.
a trend.
Yeah, damsel in distress. Yeah.
Right, like plot depth
Yeah,
instead of actual
exactly.
intention. That's interesting.
Mary Sue's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know, like I know that has a pretty straightforward, I think, implication for like girls growing up, where we're not expected to stand up for ourselves or even stand up for other people, which I think is really scary, because I think we should all be expected to do that. But
you know, in the movie Cinderella, one of the main messages, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the main thing that kind of I remember taking away from that is that she was like crying in a scene or something. And I think that's not just in did you guys see the real in action film? They're starting to do those now.
No, I have not. The live action, I have not seen the Cinderella.
Oh, I have. So
neither of you see it.
Yeah.
I love the live action.
Yeah. So for that movie, and I think also with the cartoon version, the main takeaway was like, be kind, right? Or a lot of that message of let life or something do it for you if you be kind and stuff like that, which is not always the case, because there is times where you have to be like, yo, hello, I need to take charge, and like there's a fine line between the being kind and still being morally to yourself and being genuine and good, but also taking initiative and being authoritative in a certain sense that you need to be. In this society, it's a cold world in a cheesy way to put it. And there's certain things that need to be done if you want to get ahead in life.
I think Princess and the Frog got really close to being really good with that, right? Because Tiana's whole character trait is being hardworking and, showing that initiative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andras, I guess,
a lot of inclusion.
There
was a lot of inclusion in that movie, Princess and the Frog. As the movie.
There was.
Well, for me,
like things you didn't see in the past.
Exactly. For me, full disclosure, I didn't really grow up watching these things because there was a bit of a language barrier for me growing up, so I didn't really understand. The takeaway for me from Cinderella was that foot size matters. Like that's what we're talking about, right? So it's kind of different. But I think it's interesting to think about these marketed male stereotypes, because I don't think I think the males are more marketed and the females are more like Haven were suggesting, like plot depth, which is problematic, right? The development of the female characters in terms of like protection of other people or in terms of demonstrating positive characteristics is just for their plot depth. Whereas marketing Tarzan, we want to sell loincloths, right? That sort of thing, right? Which is really interesting to me, because I'm not like there's, on the one hand, it's like from a consumerist standpoint, it's just appealing, right? Seeing a guy with 8-pack abs, like everybody liked that. Right. And then on the other hand, it's like, is it really healthy? Is it useful? Is it that good of a marketing tactic? Obviously it is, because it works. Yeah. It's just interesting to think about. I don't know what you guys...
I think it's interesting also the way that products are marketed to the gender specifically. Like it also follows that same trend.
Like boys' Happy Meals. Yeah. Like boys' Happy Meals.
Yeah, exactly.
Versus girls' Happy Meals.
That's actually a good point.
I would always get the boys' Happy Meal.
That is a good point.
Your dragon figure.
I don't know if any of you had the same thing.
Asking, like, are you a boy or a girl? My mom kept saying, like, girl. And they would give me a Barbie or something. And it would ruin my whole day.
Or
I want the Hot Wheels car. What are you on about?
That's a good example. I was thinking for women, they're like, how about this candle or soap that will smell good? And for men, they're like, how about this candle that smells like a dumpster, because that's what men like, and or like, you've been in the woods for 10 months.
I think that's a bit of an exaggeration.
Maybe a little bit.
I see where you're going. Like the ones that smell like wood smoke or something.
Yeah,
that's
but
not really good.
Yeah,
it smells
more
like a man's musk.
And they're targeted for men.
Okay, that's just disgusting.
I think if you actually want to go into that realm of the topic, look at perfume. Look at cologne. What cologne do you smell that's fruity and nice and sweet?
Right, no coconut.
Fruity colognes. Excuse.
I don't know. I guess that's one of the things that that I found in terms of when we were doing like Christmas shopping or something like that, and then there's this distinction between just in smell on its own, right? There was Christmas shopping, and I saw this couple or something, or overheard eavesdropping. They're shopping for like a certain perfume in this store, right? And the man was smelling this stuff, and then woman was like, "Oh no, I think this is actually for a woman. Let's put it away." And then I don't know how you guys might feel about that, right? I don't know, Andras, would you mind wearing a perfume that smells like daisies and tulips? You might.
Well, I don't know if I like the smell, then yeah, right.
Well,
sort of has to match the occasion.
Right, sure.
I wouldn't throw it away just because it's designed for females, quote unquote. Right? I don't do that.
Some things smell bad.
Maybe because of how I was raised.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess just the difference between a girly scent and a manly scent is kind of a big distinction between females and males, and even like scent is kind of a big way to distinguish.
Yeah, I guess that comes into play too. Yeah.
I was gonna say it's bold of you guys to assume that I wear male scents. No, I'm just kidding.
It's something that I see a lot more like soap and like well-being, like self-care products sold to women or marketed to women than to men. Like anytime you see like a bath or a bath bomb or like something to use for like self-care, cleaning yourself, they definitely try to target it to women because that's their target audience. And I've always found that interesting that kind of in our last podcast we talked a little bit about how women are expected to look very well put together and like look pretty and look like well composed at all times, or at least to make a solid first impression on someone. Andras, I don't know if you feel that. I don't know if this is a really clear cut question, but because I know that everyone cares.
Really.
Yeah, I know.
Is it like how much
but...
do you care about my
appearance? Like, do you feel like you care about your appearance every time you walk out the door?
Yeah, do you feel pressured
like
to hold like a certain standard, or do you feel way more relaxed?
This might not be like a great representation, but
very funny.
I'm just anticipating him to say, "Hey, I like bath bombs too."
Well, I've never actually used one.
Yeah. Well, same. So.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say.
I think actually to add on to what we were discussing further before we got into the whole stereotypical kind of image of the men and women in promotion actually, and how that fits into, that goes into business. So that tells you actually how much that these things are deep seated into not just society, but like politics and all this stuff like that. That's, I think, probably actually quite obvious, and we've just taken it to a magnified scope. So we talked about that man box, and I think Andras did a good well of specifying most of them. But I'm curious to see what you think of the ones outside. Yeah, exactly. Allegedly. What do you think of the ones outside of it? Ooh. What are words that come to mind outside of that box?
Interesting.
Nice question.
I don't know if there are any, because it depends on everybody's individual perception of what a man box is. For mine, let me think.
Or I guess in general, the kind that you were describing with rugged and muscular alpha, with that same box, what would you classify? And obviously we know it's not coming from you, but just stereotypically, the ones outside that you
that there is none, because I think there's definitely an element of, I think most women would say there are things can and can't be, but it'd also be interesting if you feel that way.
It's interesting. I would say that dainty isn't included in that box, but that does not mean that dainty is included in the female box. Maybe it's in no man's land, right? Maybe in an ideal world, no. Well, in an ideal world, we don't have boxes. But yeah,
I'm actually interested. What do you mean by dainty? Because I feel like your whole worldview is now surrounded by that. The way you said earlier about takeaway of Cinderella was the foot size, and now you're talking about dainty. I'm like, oh, how much have these really influenced you?
So in terms of dainty, I'm actually referring probably mostly to size, which again may be very different because I didn't have a similar childhood to a lot of people.
Yours was influenced by feet size.
Yeah, exactly. Right, making it sound like I have a fetish. Yeah, actually, there was going back really interestingly. I was thinking about what you guys said that on your last podcast. You talked about the standards of which women are supposed to achieve, right? Supposed to look a certain way, dress a certain way, act a certain way, and so I think makeup falls into that category. But interestingly enough, and I'm wondering what you guys think about this, a lot of guys consider it an unfair advantage that girls have. That guys they only have clothes to make themselves look good, and they only have hair gel, where girls have foundation, mascara, all of these different tools to increase their positively influence their perception. So guys are like, oh well, you guys are judging us because we don't look that great, but we don't have makeup. It's like I want to know what you guys think.
I'd throw it back to what do you do actually?
Yeah, you don't wear makeup.
Yeah.
Well, I don't wear makeup.
Now's a good time to
start.
One
of the most quote unquote masculine guys I know, my friend Max, Andras, him, used to wear like concealer or like foundation for a while, and he might still, I don't know, I don't really notice anymore, but he definitely wore that because I think I talked to him about it one day, and he was like, I mean, if girls can do it, why can't I? No one ever really notices. I just happen to see it.
See,
right.
See, Max is smart. I know Max. Max is smart. Being very in touch with the quote unquote jock culture of New Mexico, being a varsity swimmer and being a captain and everything, having to deal with this stuff, that would not be per se, right? Not that I would. So
if you were to put
right, yeah, it would just be ground down in an instant because it's not cool in that sense, which is interesting.
Right. What I see that actually in society I don't know about the rest of the world, because actually what I see in terms of online in America is that seeing men wear nail polish is now becoming a bit more
normal.
Yeah, more normal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but
e-boy.
E-boy.
Right, yeah. I see them doing that. Is that something to fit in with what you were saying, Andras, about what's tolerated, what's not, and where you stand? Where does that come in?
So that's an online trend, I feel like. And I feel like I'm in an interesting position because I think even though I've been an online schooler for 3 years, I still have a lot of ties to the more not homeschool related things, like public school jock, the jock culture, as I was saying, right? So I don't think it translates. I don't think that translates whatsoever. There are some interesting, there are interesting ways in which sexuality is being dealt with in the jock culture of New Mexico, at least with what I've been exposed to. But the whole nail polish / even drag dressing, those sorts of things isn't really translating as much from the online topics. It's kind of problematic, just from my personal experience, right? Sexuality is actually really, really advanced here. There's no discrimination at all. On the teams here, Haven knows one of my good friends, Trey, he's definitely one of the jock stereotypes, right? But he's very inclusive, and he makes an active effort to include those people, so they never feel, there's this conception that if you join a varsity team and you're gay, you're going to get bullied, right? Because that's what it was like. But now it's just, you join our team, it doesn't matter, right? We go to really great lengths to make sure that you feel included, and not even singling you out, not even making you special, right? But just making you feel like part of something that doesn't, we don't change our perception of you just because of your sexuality, which is really interesting. So I think that's really advanced in New Mexico. But the actual appearance in terms of makeup and that sort of thing is not transferring.
In terms of sexuality, I think it's also worth noting that, for instance, for people who are bisexual, women are bisexual women are largely more respected, or they tend to come out more than bisexual men, because it's still there's still more prejudice against, and I'm talking from statistics. I haven't seen discrimination on either side because I live in a very progressive place, but from what I've read and from what I've seen, is that bisexual men face a lot more discrimination based on their sexuality, because they're still expected to uphold that standard of straight sexuality too, because that goes back to what we were talking about with caveman, history and what we're supposed to do, which is hunt and gather,
Right.
and like reproduce. And so that goes back to like what the man's actual purpose is. And for women, people, like men tend to accept it more, right? They're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And
one thing I think that ties into that, and I guess as our way of wrapping up conversation, let's end on the note of chivalry, right? Chivalry is something that it has existed for a long time, for like the man to open up the door for the woman, right?
Carry bags.
I don't know, all those things that, right, exactly. Carry suitcase that we talked about was a big thing in our last episode. My question to you, Andras, is when do you think chivalry is no longer chivalrous? Or even for Haven as well.
Right. I don't think I open the door for someone just because they're a woman. I don't do that. I open the door for someone because they're a person, because they look like they could use the door open in front of them, right?
Yeah.
Same thing for going for a suitcase. If someone looks like they're struggling or something, I'll help them. So I was also raised relatively progressive because my parents are, talking to other people. It seems like my parents are much more open-minded than a lot of people from the previous generation. They're, what I would consider to be incredibly progressive. So again, I don't know if I have the same mindset as a lot of other people in my area, but yeah, I don't know.
I could chime in.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from what you think.
I think that my judgment is definitely very clouded because we talked last time, right, about just being super defensive. Andras has seen this. He's tried to hold bags before, and I like need to hold them to feel like useful, or feel like I'm carrying my weight. And I don't think that's entirely rational, because I do understand that like chivalry isn't actually a gendered thing, or I don't think it should be. I think chivalry should just be like taking care of the weak, or the people who need help, in that circumstance. And I think it's kind of reflective of what we consider women to be when we think about chivalry in terms of like men helping women. I think that I can be chivalrous too. Even though people don't, again, they don't expect me to be, because they don't expect me to be in a position of power where I can help someone who's weak. So I'd argue that chivalry is really close to just being like a kind person. But definitely when that seems to come from a place of helping me, not because I can't open the door or because, I'm clearly struggling, but they see me and they notice I'm a woman and they say, she needs my help because of that, because she's inherently going to struggle more. That's when it's no longer chivalrous. And you definitely can't tell that. Like when someone opens the door for me, I don't know if that's because they're a nice person or because they're like, oh, like she'll need more help than the man who is walking in behind me or something. So I don't know how practical it is to like get offended at, everyday chivalrous acts. I'll still say thank you and everything. And keep in mind that, 99% of the time, I think people are just being kind. But I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Right. I think that's really interesting. The idea of chivalry coming from kindness is interesting because it implies that they're two distinct things somehow, but I don't think they are. Right? I think that's what you were sort of talking about. And I think that comes from, or you could say that comes from the idea where previously, where women were, definitely considered inferior to men, they, being friends with a woman as a man was very different from being friends with another man as a man. It was considered progressive, or it was laughed at, right? And so they came up with, maybe they came up with a different word to describe that relationship, to describe opening the door for a woman. It's not being nice to them, because that's the jovial relationship you share with other men. It's being chivalrous. It's going out of your way to help somebody in need, right? Sort of helping it fit in with the times. And as we see that, the definition of what it means to be a man, we talked about that, how these needs change over time. The line between chivalry and kindness sort of starts to melt, right? I think that's really interesting.
I'll give you another example, maybe with not in the terms of helping then, right? Sitting at a table and having a meal, right? If you go on even if, let's say for chivalry in terms of the romantic sense, if you're paying for someone's meal, right? Or even if you do something else along those lines, right? You go out for a movie and you pay for that instead. What do you think on that then? Is that chivalrous, or even on the girl's perspective? I'm curious as to what you guys think is in terms of, do you feel indignant in terms of like, I'm going to pay my own kind of thing because I can?
I like to pay.
I don't see the difference between chivalry and kindness as a man. I'll let you.
Yeah, same. For that, for me, it's actually not at all chivalrous. I think it's more culture. For me, it has a lot of culture influence. I think both maybe just culturally men are just expected to pay, but also for me as a Daisy, or I guess other cultures also experience the same things where we are just trying to like be the one to pay because we think this is kind and this is a nice thing to do, and this is what we're doing to respect other people. So maybe that kind of idea of respect also comes into chivalry.
Respecting herewith. Although I think it definitely is true that I know for all of us saying that, you know, chivalry and everything is like just being kind to us and just being respectful. I definitely have experience, like, again, like one of my closest friends has said like just little off things, right? If he'll pay for something, he's like, oh, you know, take care of the lady or something like that. And even if he doesn't really mean that, that rubs me the wrong way a lot. Because I can take care of myself, you know? Or even if I couldn't, I don't want, you know, paying $3 pity money for my croissant, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess it also ties back into expectation. Maybe if the man doesn't pay, he feels like he's not, you know, doing what is a man should, or he's not respecting, or is like a pretty like direct way of saying that this is not a kind gesture, I'm not respecting you, because it's just so ingrained in our society. So I don't think we should be really offended from chivalry, but
yeah,
it just depends on context.
I think it's also,
you know, if someone's paying me, or, you know,
right,
that works out.
Right, yeah. I don't know if it's good to have that sort of vendetta, because if the guy's just being nice, right? If we remove gender from this, right? If the other person's just being nice and then you have this sudden need to pay for everything yourself, it's kind of like a middle finger move almost, right? If you have a vendetta against this. So I don't know what I don't know what the right choice is, but I don't know if being so polar is productive either. Right. It's
I agree,
it's a hard topic.
And it's hard to keep separating that.
Yeah. So I guess do you feel that you have that, I guess, like Sophie was kind of saying, that society has this expectation of the guy to do so. Do you feel that you've had to be expected to do that or anything?
I feel like a good person is expected to do these things, regardless of the sex of the other person. I personally don't feel pushed by society to open doors for women over men. Not at all. I just open doors for everybody. But I think it might exist in places that are much less neutral in terms of these things, because New Mexico, I feel like, is a relatively neutral place. But, you know, places that lean on either side of the spectrum of, you know, either very liberal or not even liberal versus conservative, that's the wrong one. Just very aged perspective versus very contemporary perspectives.
Yeah.
That tends to be problematic there, right? So I think it does exist. I just don't feel it.
Specific memory of going out to dinner with a few people, and it was like 3 girls, including myself and one guy, and we were all heading on the way out through the door, and the girl goes first, and she holds the door open for the next person. Second girl goes out, she holds the door open for that. This other guy walks out, and he doesn't catch the door, so I'm walking behind him expecting him to keep it open, and the door slams in my face, and I walk out, and everyone's like, dude, what are you doing? Why'd you do that? And he's like, what? I'm a feminist. And he keeps walking away. And I think about that in terms of, you know, chivalry and holding the door open and stuff. I'm like, well, that would have just been being a nice person in that case. But it's interesting. Funny. Right.
Yeah.
But if you held the door open, would you have felt attacked?
I don't know.
That's the question. Because then there's no right answer, right? He opens the door, he doesn't open the door.
See, yeah, I won't know the male perspective, and I just will never know that. But for me, when I hold the door open for people, it makes me feel good as a person. It's like I'm doing my small acts of kindness. So I feel like maybe I wonder if it reflects the same way as a man, because like as a woman, we're not really expected to do this thing. So when I do it, it feels more like a big
I personally
kind of
never
gesture.
hold the door
I
open
wonder
because
if it's the same thing for a
I just
male.
hate everyone.
I would kind of agree. I think I'm a bit more like Andras, but just as a girl, I hold the door for everyone. What doesn't matter whether you're like a 2-month-old baby who can barely walk to a woman who's like freely able to open the door, but I just have this thing where I'm like, well, I'm gonna hold it if I can, just to be. I don't know. That's ingrained in me. But yeah, I guess before we wrap up, Andras, is there? I guess we've talked about, we've covered a lot. We've talked about the toxic masculinity, a lot of that, and I guess where that kind of stemmed from, as well as when is this thing called chivalry no longer chivalrous? Is there anything that you'd like to add further before we end on toxic masculinity and maybe your thoughts on that,
Or how you fit into
for
the
other
gender equality
boys
of
or
the
men out there?
movement as a
Yeah.
whole, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So
Yeah.
I don't think I think about it consciously. I don't think I try to fit in, partially because it doesn't really it's not immediately involved in my house because I'm relatively isolated and the people I talk to are usually just all men, just because it's a varsity boys swim team. But going back to chivalry, just right before we wrap up, I think it's also interesting. Chivalry also pertains in the opposite direction, and it's a more modern thing. Actually, no, maybe it's not. But like, let me think of an example. If a man is holding a baby, right, and the baby needs its diaper changed, and the woman comes
Right.
along and they say, "Oh, let me help you with that." That's
Right.
like the opposite flow direction of chivalry, in which the woman
That's
is
true.
like, let me help you with that. It's not intending to say, no, you can't do it. It's just, we do this
An
more,
assumption,
or
kind of.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So I don't think it's necessarily one-sided. I do agree that chivalry most often corresponds to men doing things for women, but as things change, I don't know if the line between chivalry and kindness breaks down, I don't know what happens. But it's interesting to think
I
about
think
the fact that it's
the
not
problem
just
there,
one way.
I don't want to, keep this on for too long, but the problem there is that, again, chivalry, either way, whether it's men holding open doors, being the physical, protector, or women helping with childcare, changing a diaper, then even if it's a helpful thing, it's actively, what's the word? Supporting, I guess, those
Toxic.
roles for ourselves. So I think that's probably why I'm so knee-jerk when it comes to like a guy offering to help physically, or even like we talked, men are expected to be like the breadwinners and stuff when they offer to pay. I think that's why it's knee-jerk, because letting them do that feels like I'm admitting to them owning those roles. So Celine,
I like that you created that distinction, Hayden. I really do.
Right,
Hence why we carry our own suitcase.
Yeah, and it just really affirms the fact that there is societal roles. There is.
Right, yeah.
And it's still apparent.
Yeah. I think we could keep going on this topic, but we've kind of had it. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Andras, for coming on today.
Thank you. Loved it.
Thank you guys for listening to us for Blur Box. This is with Chloe, Haven, and Pooja, and Sophie. If you like our show and want to know more about us, check us out on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcast, or please leave us a review on iTunes. And be sure to join us next week when we have another special guest on, and we'll be uploading again on Saturday. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.